Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Curious John episode I can't remember because I didn't do a podcast last week. On that topic, let me just start by saying it irks me a little bit, and some of you will know this, and I will speak very briefly on it because I've mentioned this a few times. Like, it bothers me that I don't get a podcast every week, right? And this week has been relatively, busy. And by relatively, I mean extremely. And sometimes there's little tidbits, little topics I can bring up and I could talk about, but the justification in my mind is the idea that I would rather give you something with substance and something that is far more of a full course versus giving you an appetizer and hoping that you're satisfied with it. uh, it just always is, I feel, in the best run to have a podcast that have substance to them versus having some that are less substance but yet having more episodes out for the year, because I do have goals for this year for the certain amount of podcasts I'm trying to get out. And with that said, I want to meet that number, but I also don't want to meet it at the sacrifice of putting out subpar content. So bear with me. When I don't get podcasts out, there's definitely a reason for it. It's not just laziness. This year, for me at least, laziness is not a factor. I am busier than I have ever been, ever. And it's not a matter of laziness, and it's not a matter of not optimizing my time. It's more of an issue of, once again, I'm chasing the proverbial motivation dragon, where I'm always looking for a certain type of mindset. I'm looking for a certain type of fluidity in my thoughts. So enough of that rant. Just excuse the fact that I wasn't able to get a podcast out this past week. So how's your week been? Talk to me about it. Tell me. You having a good week? So, as I alluded to earlier, I've been incredibly busy this week. I mean, work's got me incredibly busy. Working, the amount of hours I've been working lately has been a bit crazy. So, with that said, I'll still try to get my workouts in, and because I try to optimize my time as much as possible, and that includes taking in workouts where I can get them, even if that's at work, right? Getting optimizing my commute so that I don't spend too much time driving, optimizing my time at work so I'm taking care of multiple things at once and not just taking care of, the one task. So, and in doing so, the other day I felt like I really need to get a workout in, right? Because it had just been a stressful week. That by that time I was like 2 12-hour shifts in, and I felt like I just really needed to get a workout in. So I felt, let's go get a workout in. So for those of you that like the Easter eggs, some of you will remember that if you're on my close friends group on Instagram at LifeGeneralist, let me know if you want to be added. I posted a picture and I basically just said, first time doing OHP in a while. It was in that workout that the concepts of this episode really were sparked. And I remember I did some overhead press, but because the type of workouts I'm trying to have now are more time efficiency workouts, which means there are a lot of circuits. It's basically, circuits are, you're going from one exercise to the next with no rest in between. You get rest in between the full circuits, right? So I was basically going overhead press, compound movement, which means multiple muscle groups at once. I was going to a semi walking lunge, kind of like a step lunge, with heavier weight, middle to high reps, and then I was moving on to, I can't remember the third exercise. It was like bent over rows, and these were consecutive, heavier reps, heavier weights, moderate reps, and I was basically going one after the other. And I remember sitting there doing the OHP, and it's the first time I've been doing OHP in over a year at least, and I mentioned that in that picture. And I remember doing the OHP and then going in and doing the lunges. And during the lunges, I'm like counting, right? In my mind, I like to count because otherwise I will lose count, and then I punish myself by doing more reps. So I'm hitting 4, and at 4, the exhaustion started kicking in, that the heavy breathing started kicking in because I just went from one compound movement to another compound movement without rest. So I'm in number 4, and I'm roughly halfway there. I'm doing about 10 reps. And I remember sitting there and just thinking like, oh, I'm halfway there, and and that's coming from the idea that I'm getting a little tired. I'm starting to breathe a little heavier, and lactic acid is building the legs a little bit. And then at that moment, I was given the gift of pulling back. And what I mean by that is, in that moment, I was stressed and I was focused on my body and what my body was feeling, and the exhaustion and a little bit of lactic acid, and the fact that I was just exhausted from a long day of work. And I remember thinking like, oh, I'm halfway there. Like I have 4 more reps to go. I have 5 more reps to go, right? That was my mindset, is what I meant by that statement. And I just remember kind of like being given this gift of being able to step back of that moment, step out of the box I was living in, right? I stepped out of the box and I realized like, oh, I have 4 reps, cool. But I looked at it more like, oh, I'm barely halfway there. And this is what I tell you guys all the time. This half glass mindset. This is the rant I had probably a week ago. This half glass mindset does not benefit you. I could have easily said, instead of saying, oh, I'm barely halfway there, I could have looked at this and said, okay, cool, I'm halfway there. And literally, it took like 15 seconds. It's going to be 15 seconds of extra effort, because it's not like this has been a 4-hour endeavor and I'm still barely halfway there. It was literally 15 seconds ago and it flew by and I'm halfway there, right? That's a totally different mindset to the situation, completely different. And in doing so, I kind of laughed a little bit because I checked myself. I checked myself knowing that I come on this podcast all the time and I tell you guys about these approaches and I tell you that I practice these things, and I do. But sometimes I check myself, and this was a moment where my brain checked me for this mindset. That's a mindset I always tell you guys to keep an eye out for, to correct. And I kind of laughed at it a little bit. And as I'm sitting there finishing out the reps, which, by the time I thought through this idea, I had finished the lunges and I was halfway towards finishing the rows. And I was just thinking through this and I was just kind of laughing internally, because once again, it's how you look at life and how you like to persuade yourself to look at things negatively or positively, depending on the level of stress and pressure you're feeling in that moment. And so I don't know how to train or teach people to be able to take a step away like that. Take your mind out of that box that you've confined yourself in. And let me be clear when I say that. These are boxes that we individually confine ourselves to. You have to find a way to stop yourself, reset, stop, and go back and really think this through. I don't know how to teach somebody how to do that, because I'm not always able to do that myself. But if you can hack this in a way, you'll be far more successful, right? Like, there are those people that in the middle of their dreams, they can, quote unquote, hack the dream. And the moment they realize that they're asleep and they're dreaming, some people can take control of their dreams and really develop it so that they are actually doing what they want in their dreams. They're no longer in nightmares. They're no longer in just a dream. They're doing whatever they want because they know they're outside of the confines of that dream, or what they think is really, really real. Somewhat Matrix-like, right? So that was one of the things I was thinking about as my workout. And, some of you, get a little frustrated at the idea that I bring up workouts so much. These moments are the reason why workouts are so important to me, right? It's a multifaceted concept when it comes to my love for working out. One, it helps check me a little bit. It helps check my mindset, which we'll talk about in a second. Secondly, it helps get rid of some of this frustration and angst from your day-to-day, especially if you've been stressed, to say the least. 3, it helps your body just function better. If you're working out hard, you can sometimes, I'm going to be very clear when I say this, sometimes supersede some of the trash diet, if you will. It won't 100% cure that. Let me be clear. But it can help you mitigate some of that. And combined with a good diet, you're in a phenomenal shape. Let's talk about the part 2 of this workout. I often kind of think through like generalities for people. Whether or not you're male or female, or however you identify yourself with, there's commonalities between all of those people. And I often think about like males and how innately males need to be tested. Males need to be tested because males and testosterone come with a certain level of bravado, a certain level of overconfidence that isn't substantiated, that isn't at all real. And I saw this most clearly. I'll give you my experience of this. When I was a young man, and I went to like I was interested in taking like Muay Thai, and I was interested in learning to strike a little bit. And I remember the closest thing I had was a jiu-jitsu school, and they had striking. And I was like, well, this school kind of does everything, so like let me just try it out. Let me just try a free day, right? Which is basically what most schools will do for you when they're trying to get you to stay. And I remember going in and trying jiu-jitsu for the first time. And I was coming from a weightlifting background. I'd done powerlifting and semi-bodybuilding stuff. And I remember thinking like, dude, I'm pretty strong. I can deadlift like 500 pounds, bro. Like I'm good. I can take care of some shit if I needed to, right? There's this male bravado that totally exists. And unchecked, it leads to some really fuck shit. So I remember going to jiu-jitsu, and it was a whole bunch of people that had zero experience. And, some of that athleticism pays off, certain bits of it. But in starting in jiu-jitsu, you're not starting standing. They want you to start on your knees because they don't want people falling incorrectly and hurting themselves, right? And I remember rolling with this guy who was in probably not great shape. He was around my age. And I remember I did end up choking him out. I got him in a guillotine, and I choked him out my first time ever rolling in the mats. With that said, keep in mind there's a certain level of athleticism that came with my training. There's also years of just UFC fights in my brain where I just tapped into something that I've probably seen a million times, right? That's not going to be everybody's experience. But this was also with two guys that had zero experience. And then I remember later on I rolled with somebody who was a higher belt, right? They were like a blue belt. And I just got ragdolled. I just got ragdolled. Like I could do nothing. And after a certain, very brief period, by the way, your cardiovascular endurance is just out the window. When you have somebody that knows what they're doing and you don't know what you're doing, very quickly you start to realize that those people are staying far calmer than you are. Your anxiety is up, therefore your gas tank drains at a higher percentage because your anxiety is going up. So your mental fatigue is also increasing. That also lends to your physical fatigue, right? This is no different than weeks ago when we talked about taking a stressful thing and making a game out of it. The way you come into something sometimes dictates the pace. So because I was probably stressed out, I was worried about gassing out, I was worried about getting choked out, I was worried about this person who was just doing whatever the hell they wanted to, and I was getting tapped out all the time. That bravado went out the window, and I started this somewhat, one would argue, somewhat short journey in jiu-jitsu where I did it for a few years. But men, and this goes back to my point, men have this false sense of bravado, this false sense of like they think they can do something, and I definitely had that going into that class. And while me choking out the one guy didn't help that, it was very quickly corrected when the person that knew what they were doing managed to just choke me out a few times within a few minutes. So that's why things like testing yourself is important. First and foremost, the simplest way of doing it is through physical fitness, whatever physical fitness you want. You can get on a treadmill and do Tabata, right? Where you're doing short intervals, like maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds of like 100% work rate, and then you do 30 seconds of just moderate, and another 100% work rate. I think that's the protocol, give or take. It varies by interpretation, but that'll test you. What is that saying? They're saying it says exhaustion will make cowards out of everyone. And physical fitness is the very first way of testing yourself. The other way is doing some sort of martial arts, jiu-jitsu, striking. It'll center you, because it really makes you understand who you are in difficult situations. It helps you understand how much you really know. It makes you understand that this false bravado that you have in your mind isn't necessarily who you really are in a real life situation. And the other way to test yourself is really just to get in a fight, which I highly, highly suggest you avoid. Because you never know how those things play out, right? We all see tons of videos online where people fight in the street and somebody slams their head on the ground, on the concrete. Next thing you know, the skull's cracked and you're going to prison because you killed somebody, right? It's never the way to go. You shouldn't go that route. As a male, you should not choose to test yourself like that. But if you also choose not to test yourself, you're going to either have a lot of built-up angst or a lot of built-up insecurities, and you're going to definitely have a false sense of what you can really do and how you think you will respond in the real world. And by the way, I know people like this. In fact, I just gave you the example that I was one of these people. And you know what the worst part of this, folks, is? The fact that we all, as males, once again, the females listening to this might not understand, but I'm trying to give you the perspective. As males, we need this shit constantly. And I'll give you a reason why I say that. I'm going to go back to this gym story that I just told you a second ago, right? I went from the overhead press, I went to the lunges, I went to the bent over rows, and I started having this mindset, right? Remember I just talked about that? Let's go back to that. So I remember before that or after that, I did another set of exercises. Once again, it was like 4 or 5 exercises, one after the other, no breaks. That's just the way I maximize my time, because I no longer have the time like I did in my youth when I was cutting weight and I was able to do like an hour and a half workout without stretching counted in that time frame. I don't have that time anymore. So I'm trying to maximize my workout by doing circuits which hopefully will promote the type of results I'm trying to get. But back to the topic, I digress. So I was doing one of these circuits where I was really pushing myself. And because you're going from one moderate to heavy exercise to another moderate to heavy exercise to another moderate to heavy exercise to another moderate to heavy exercise, you're getting tired, and you do get tired, and you start breathing hard. There's no way out of it. If you're not breathing hard in this type of circuit workout, you're either not lifting heavy enough or you're not pushing yourself enough. That's just my opinion. And I remember like going into this workout slightly frustrated just because of how kind of the stress of the job, right, was getting to me that day a little bit. And I remember doing this workout and just being tired and wanting to just kind of just step away, just be like, all right, let me cool off a little bit. But I knew I had to get going because I needed, first and foremost, get the next set so I can be on a decent time frame, so I can get home in a decent time frame, right? And I remember just kind of looking at myself and being like, what happened? Right? What happened? Sometimes I have these internal conversations with myself, and that's what helps me get these podcasts. But I had that conversation with myself where I'm like, what happened? Where was all that frustration from hours ago? Where was all that energy from hours ago? Where was that? And once again, I had to laugh because I checked myself. I had to check myself again because that's the male thing. That's that ego, that male angst, whatever you want to call it. Had to check it because whatever it was I had earlier, it's like, where is that now? Why isn't that energy still here, right? For those of you that follow my workouts, which is probably one of you, I have a workout that I used to do, which I've talked about. I just haven't had a chance to do it because I'm trying to do more. I'm trying to do other stuff. I don't want to get into the semantics of it, but I have this workout that I've talked about before where it's, can't find my freaking phone. What did I do with my phone? Anyways, I have this workout I do, and I do it primarily at home because I can get away with it at home a little easier instead of being like in a more public style gym. And it's a circuit. I do basically an overhead press. I go into a front squat. I go bend over to a row. I jump down into a push-up position. Then I kind of go do a curl back into that overhead press position. And I do that. That's one set. Let me go back. All of that I just described is one rep. And I do that 6 times, right? And then that's one set. And I do those 6 times. So 6 sets is basically what I'm telling you. And that workout will kick your ass, especially if you're doing it on a heavier weight, where those overhead presses towards the end are hard. You might be using a little bit of body English to get those up. And I time myself. That's a workout where I time myself, and I think the best I've ever been able to do is something like 16 minutes to do that workout with a moderate to heavy weight. And it's hard. That's a hard freaking workout. That's a hard one. I'm not going to lie to you guys. That is a hard workout. And some of you might have caught it, but some of you might have not caught it. And whenever I do that workout, and whenever I go through it, on that board, the workout is KTSFE. And in case some of you are trying to figure out what that is, I'll tell you, but I gave you a second to try to figure it out. That workout it's basically called that because it's keep that same fucking energy. And the reason why I call it that is because it goes back to that male angst, right? Like that male frustration, that anger that gets built up throughout your day, that you have throughout your day, and you have whatever it is that you're working through in your day to day. It's like when you get in that workout, your mindset goes to like, oh, let me breathe. Oh, let me focus on myself. Let me not do something wrong to damage myself along the way, right? But when you're sitting there breathing in between sets, and I'm looking at my heart rate because I make an intentional focus on trying to never go under 130 beats per minute in that workout. I have a heart rate monitor, yes, all that shenanigans. That's why I do it at home. Anyways, back to the point. I try to keep my heart rate over 130 beats per minute through that whole workout. Towards the end of the set, especially if I'm trying to break a time record, my heart rate, I've seen it as high as 190 beats a minute. 190 beats a minute is very uncomfortable. When I'm sitting there in between the sets, trying to let my heart rate come down, there's a bit of me where it's like, I know I'm on a timer. I know I got to keep going. I know I got to push myself. And every time, multiple times throughout that workout, I remind myself, what happened to that energy from earlier? Where is that now? Keep that same fucking energy. So, for those of you, I was going to go into another rant about stress and how to kind of manage it a little bit, but maybe that'll be a podcast for another day because this one is getting a little lengthier. I'll just leave it at that. If you're a female and this is all very different and alien to you, you have children or you have husbands or you have boyfriends, this is just a learning experience of malehood. The asterisk on that situation is that there is a wavelength of men, right? There are some men that are very manly. There are some men that are not very manly, right? And there's a scope in your guy, boyfriend, son, whatever, falls somewhere in that range. And depending on that range, you'll have more of a need for this. But this is just more of a lesson in the male mind a little bit. But for those of you that are men that are sitting here listening to this or doing whatever you're doing while you're listening to this podcast, I urge you to think about these ideas. I urge you to really think through and ask yourself what you're doing to get some of this male angst out. Because while some of you don't think that this angst exists, I would love to have the conversation with you. And I would love to have the conversation with you with your partner around. And if you're willing to admit that this exists in your life, I would ask you what you're doing to manage it if you're not testing yourself in some sort of way. And the reason, I'll leave you with this, the reason why you want to deal with this is because all of this stuff bleeds into everybody around you. If I didn't deal with the stress that I have to deal with right now, if I didn't deal with it in a healthy manner, which is the workouts, it would bleed through people all around me. And I know that for a fact. It would bleed into my family. It would bleed into my friends. It would definitely bleed into my coworkers. And so this is why fitness for me is incredibly crucial. And it's at this point in my life, it's not an option. It's something I have to pencil in for everybody, not just for myself. So basically, I'll leave you folks to think about that. There's some considerations there. If some of you guys want to try to take on my workout, let me know. I'd be curious to know if you guys want to try this one out. It's not for the faint of heart. KTSFE is not for the faint of heart. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Hope to have more podcasts out soon. I'll be reaching out to those of you that I want to get some interviews for. And if you want to be on this as an interview, I would love for you to be on it. Reach out to me. You know how to get a hold of me. LifeGeneralist on Instagram. That's it. We'll talk next week.